Hey, what's up, Facebook? What's up, fellas? Welcome to My Life Monday with Mike, your mentor. Welcome. Monday is where I share some things from my life from the previous week, maybe some lessons I learned, some things that I found interesting with you guys as it pertains to life and manhood. And I think tonight I have some really good stuff for you. So I think you're going to want to grab a pen and a paper, or maybe you're like me and you take notes on your phone. Open up Evernote or the notepad and get ready for what we got. If you're new to this page, it's simple. I had a pretty rough life growing up. Went through some crazy things, maybe more than some people go through in their whole life. Um, and now that I'm older and I find myself reflecting on my life, I got to thinking of, why was it that I was able to do something with my life? Have my own family, be the first in my family to graduate from college, have a decent job. Not to say that I didn't make mistakes, because if you pay attention to this page for any length of time, you'll see that I made a lot of mistakes. But why was I able to never give up and to keep climbing and moving forward? And it was two things. One was the grace of God in my life. Without Him, I wouldn't be here today, and I fully know that and acknowledge that. And two, it was I had mentors in my life. Men that I read about in books that inspired me and gave me hope as I learned about their stories and how they were able to make it through the tragedies and the difficult times that they faced. And then it was men that I had in my everyday life that saw something in me, whether it was coaches or a friend's father who came alongside me and built me up and spoke words of encouragement into me. Spoke vision over me, allowed me to see how they lived their lives, the way they interacted with their wives, the people around them out in society, the decisions that they made. And I soaked it all up like a sponge because I wanted to know what it was like to be a real man, what that looked like. And my goal, the inner vow that I made at a young age, was never to be like my own father, who was absent for most of my life. Um, and so I took that wisdom and I tried to apply it to my own life. And now I want to give that back. I see just all the craziness that's going on in the world, the number of men that are committing suicide each and every day, and it breaks my heart. And I think a lot of that is because they don't have good brothers around them to encourage them and to speak truth into their life and to help them deal with difficult situations. I got a couple of guys right now that I'm just trying to do life with and help them through some hard events and just to come alongside them and to listen in a non-judgmental way and allow them to share their shame or their embarrassment or their struggle, just to watch the load come off their shoulders. Sometimes they cry and they weep because of the things that they're going through, but to see the hope and the empowerment that they experience from being able to share that is extremely gratifying is not the word, but encouraging, right? Because I know what that's like to um, want to share things, but afraid of what people might think or afraid of how people might treat you, and to have that safe environment, that non-judgmental environment, and to be able to really open up and expose who you truly are, is that's what freedom looks like. So that's kind of my goal with this page, is just to encourage men to better their lives and to answer the higher calling that we have as husbands, as fathers, as members of our community, um, the different roles that we play on a daily basis. So we'll jump into it tonight with my life on Monday. Um, I have a hard time doing this day because I don't like talking about myself necessarily, and generally I think my life is pretty not boring, but minimal. I like to just kind of keep the same routines, and just roll with the flow. But this week was a little bit different, so I ended up taking my son up to a men's retreat as part of our church. Haven't been up there probably in 4 or 5 years, so it was really cool just to go up there and hang out with my son, have some good times, learning a lot of good stuff, um, playing a lot of games, doing a lot of cool stuff, horseback riding. Haven't ridden a horse in years, so that was interesting and fun. There was some man games is one of the things they had. So they had a bunch of stations set up this one day, and you go and you do these different obstacles, whether it's throwing a football through holes at various heights, or seeing who could do the most pull-ups, to having a wheelbarrow race. And it was basically these different churches competing against each other. And the final night there was a big dodgeball tournament, which was cool. So laser tag, basketball. Not to mention, one of my favorite things is the food that they served us, from the various appetizers, wings, jalapeno poppers, to what they call the man feast on the final night, which just unlimited steaks, right? All you can eat. It's just pretty crazy. But the good breakfast and the lunches that they have, they take really good care of us. They treat us well. But my reason for sharing this with you is just the different workshops, I guess, that they have, or services, maybe you want to call it. So they brought in this guy, Kevin DeVries. You can look him up online. Basically, he has this company called Grace Adventures, and he's been all over the world, doing a lot of different things, climbing mountains. He's climbed every single mountain, I believe, that there is to climb. Um, he has skied to the North Pole and to the South Pole, so he likes those type of adventures. And he's got a really cool story. He's actually spoken at my church once before, but I never really knew his personal story and some of the struggles and the things that he's been through in his own life. So that was really cool to see and to hear about. But one of the things that he talked about, right, is doing these things, right, looking for this adventure in your life, and why men need adventure and they long for it in this greater purpose, to do something significant, and where that comes from and how it ties in to being a man. And I don't find it to be a coincidence that that's what he was speaking about, and that's what we speak about on this page, and how these things are all coming together in my life. Like, repeatedly, this message or these themes keep reappearing in my life, having to do with men and with manhood. And it's just it's amazing, right, how God continues to speak to me about these truths, about these things, and to expose me to different areas within that spectrum that maybe I haven't thought about before. So tonight, I just want to share a couple of the most meaningful things that Kevin talked about with us this weekend, in hopes to encourage you and to get you to think about these questions, right? Because part of this page is asking ourselves these tough questions and actually thinking about them. And we don't need to have the answer, but we need to acknowledge that these questions exist, and we can't better ourselves as men without addressing these things. So the first thing that, or the first thing that stuck out to me was, he asked, do you own, or does your story own you, or do you own your story? Right, as we go through life and we deal with the things that life hands us, and a lot of times, if you've lived long enough, there's some sort of tragedy, there's some sort of shame or guilt or regret that takes place in your life at some point, maybe multiple points along your life. And how do you deal with those? Do they own you? Meaning, are you not able to share those things with other people? Are you not able to be vulnerable about those things that have happened to you? Right? If you find yourself in that place, that means that your story owns you. being able to share those things, right? Whether it's publicly or with somebody who means something to you, or with another, coming alongside another brother, and being transparent means that you own your story. And there's power in owning your story, because you determine where you're going to go after that, versus you're not having, not owning your story keeps you where you're at in life, in all these different areas of your life, and you become stagnant, and you can experience fear, which leads to more shame, more regret, more guilt, until one day, like all of us, you find yourself maybe on your deathbed, wishing that you had done more, wishing you had taken control of your story, right? The story that we're all given. So that's the first thing that really stuck out to me, and got me thinking. Is do I own my story, and not just a part of it? Do I own all of it? Do I accept it for what it is, and who it's made me? The second thing is, a man is healed through honor, right? And it just goes back to this first point of telling our story. And there's something powerful when we share our stories, and other people, especially men, honor that. They thank us for being vulnerable, and being transparent, right? Because it's freeing, not only for ourselves, but for the other men that hear our story. And that honor that we receive heals those wounds that we've incurred throughout our lives, by living this story out. So I would encourage you, once again, whether it's in a group setting, or maybe you're not ready for that and it's in a one-on-one setting, but having somebody in your life that you can trust and will also honor you, with that relationship, that you can come out, and you can share these things with them, and do life with them, so that you're able to drop these weights, drop this weight of shame, this weight of guilt, this weight of regret, all these things that men experience but don't vocalize and don't internalize, so you can get rid of those things, and you can move on with your life, into a better life that God has for you. So the next thing that stuck out to me is, your purpose is encrypted inside your pain. And I don't just think this pertains to men, but to everybody, right? Everybody wants to know, what is the purpose of my life? Like, why am I here? And we're all unique individuals. I believe as unique as every snowflake that falls from the sky. And we've all been given a purpose that only we can fulfill. But how do we discover that purpose? And it's interesting. Kevin, he really got me thinking on this. And I do believe this is true, right? Is the purpose is encrypted inside your pain. So I think about my own life, right? Like, my biggest pain or my biggest wound was from my father, and my father not being there, and what that did to me as a young boy, as a teenager, and as a young man. And now how I'm using that pain that I felt during those times to make a difference in men's lives, right? And I don't think that that's another thing that's like, it's coincidence, right? That he said that, and that I'm here, and I'm doing this thing, this Mike, your mentor thing, because it comes out of that. It comes out of that pain that I experienced, and not wanting others to experience that same pain, and not just only on the fatherless level, but on the suicide level, or even the level of just being a man and holding these things inside and not having anybody to share with them, and how much hurt and destruction and confusion that can cause. So your purpose is encrypted inside your pain. What pain are you dealing with, or have you, maybe you're not dealing with, that's occurred in your past, that you might find your purpose lying in? right? Your true purpose of why you're here on this earth. I just had a conversation with someone today, and just doing life with them, and we were talking about marriage, and we were talking about life, and it's like there's no playbook written on these things. There's no manual that offers a step-by-step guide. There's obviously uh, literary works and books that give advice and warn you of potential pitfalls, but I mean, you can't know what's good without experiencing what's evil. You can't know what it's like to love something with all your heart without having to have lost something. These things are like universal laws. Like you don't appreciate them. You don't understand the weight and the magnitude that these different things carry without experiencing the inverse in some fashion. So your pain is encrypted, or your purpose is encrypted inside your pain. Just give that some thought about your own life. The next one. Do you want a successful life or a significant life? So part of Kevin's story, right, was he had his own business, and he lost that business. And you can find this information online if you Google his name. But after having this business, he said, and wanting to have this huge house, right, with all these things and all these cars, and and in his identity being wrapped up in that, and then him losing that, and now that he's on the later part of his life, and he's advanced in his maturity, he's realized that he's not concerned about having what he used to think is a successful life. He's more concerned about having a significant life, and when he's dead and he's gone, what impact will his life have had on other people, the people that he came in contact with, whether directly or indirectly. And we talk a lot about that on this page as well, right? What significance do we want our lives to have? What kind of legacy do we want to leave in other people, right? How will people remember us when we're dead? What will they say about us when we're gone? These are all things that we need to think about because they help us not only in our everyday lives, but they help us plan for the future, um, and they affect the decisions that we're going to make. And I think thinking forward like this will help us avoid a lot of pitfalls and mistakes that we open ourselves up to. A lot of the mistakes that I made in my life, I don't think that I would have made those mistakes had I thought for if I had thought about this, right? If I had thought about uh, do I want to have a significant life, right? Do I want to make a difference in people's lives? How do I want people to think about me and to say about me when I'm gone? So just something to keep there in the back of your mind, or maybe the top of your mind, that you refer back to every now and then, and you ask yourself, what kind of life am I living? Am I living a successful life, or maybe what appears to be a successful life, or am I living a significant life, a life full of purpose? So the next one is marrying a queen doesn't make you a king. Eve didn't give Adam his name. And Kevin talked about this, right? He talked about for a lot of men, and maybe you can relate to this, right? Like we try to find our significance in our spouses, like, what we do for them, how we provide for them, what kind of relationship that we have for them, and none of that stuff is bad. But our identities as men aren't found in our wives, and aren't found in our families. they're found in God and what God says about us, right, as men, about that truth. And that's why he said Eve didn't give Adam his name. God gave Adam his name, right? His identity and who he was came from God. And I think a lot of times, just speaking with the guys that I speak with and helping some of these guys deal with the things that they're going through, and I know what it's like because, you know, in my own life, me and my wife, we're close to calling it quits. And I think that a lot of us guys, we find or we make our identity out of, who we are as a husband, right, and what we mean to our wives, and not to downplay the significance of that role in that stewardship that God has given us. But we have to be careful, because if we let all our identity be wrapped up in that, it can get warped, and we can lose sense and lose track of who we really are. And I just want to encourage you, if you don't really know who you are, you feel kind of lost, I want to encourage you, man, go in the Bible and find out what God says about you. Right? There's this book. If you don't got one, I'm happy to send you one, but you can get it online. It says Who I Am in Christ, and it's got every single verse from the Bible where God is talking about you as a person, and what he says about you in those truths. And you need to get these, and you need to have some of them to refer to and to remember when you're facing a difficult time, and you are questioning your identity in who you really are. I don't think it's a coincidence that when Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist, God publicly announced in front of that whole crowd, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." And then immediately after that, we have the next scene, which is Jesus going into the desert for 40 days and 40 nights. And the devil comes to tempt him. And the first temptation that he gives to Jesus is to take those stones that were lying around, and to turn them into bread, right? And Jesus' response was great. And he said, "Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord." And what Jesus is referring to was his identity, which had previously just been spoken to him by God, when God said, "This is my son in whom I am well pleased." And he was reminding the devil of that. And then the devil had to leave. Sometimes we got to remind the devil of our identity. We got to remind ourselves of our real identity and what God really says about us, and in the truth that's there. And I know I forget, and I know that others forget all the time what God really says about us. And that's what really matters, because that's where our identity comes from. So the last one is what Kevin calls the doctrine of descent. We must go in before we go out. You must go down before you go up. And so the context to that is, right, so he climbed Mount Everest. I think, yeah, Everest is the tallest mountain peak in the world. I think that's Everest. And I don't know all the technical things, but basically what you do is they bring you up to this point, right? It's called base camp. It's at so many feet, and I think Everest is like 30,000 feet in the air. And I remember him saying that's the altitude that jumbo jets fly at, right? So there's very little oxygen up there. So what they do is they bring you to base camp, and then it's actually, if I'm remembering this correctly, it doesn't take very long from base camp to the top of the mountain. So they bring you to base camp, you're there for a little bit, and then they bring you up to the peak. And then when you get to the peak, you're not there for a long time. They immediately bring you back down, right, back to base camp. And the reason they do that is because once you're up at that altitude at 30,000 feet, your body, like, it remembers that. It remembers what that feels like. It becomes ingrained in you. And then they bring you back down to base camp, to allow your body to heal and to adjust. And while it's healing and adjusting, it still won't forget what it's like to be at the top of the mountain. So you come back down and you're there at base camp for like 2 weeks before you ascend back up to the peak, to really spend time up there, and to experience what that's like. And that's the whole point of you must go down before you go up. And it's like what we talk about on this page when he says we must go in before we go out, right? Like, we have to go inside of ourselves and ask ourselves these hard questions and face these things that we refuse to face and address before, so that we can heal. And then once we heal, right, in our own lives, we're able to then climb those mountains and get over these things that have stopped us so many times before in the other areas of our life, whether we realize it or not, right? In our marriages, in our relationship with our children. Maybe it's our relationships with our parents. Maybe it's relationships with somebody else, right? In our careers, in what we think about ourselves. Because these wounds that we have, right, from when we were climbing, right, the mountain of life, so to speak, right, we got these wounds. Now we need to come back down, and we need to face those wounds, and we need to deal with them if we're ever to, to finish climbing, in this illustration, finish climbing the mountain and ascend the peak and then go back over the other side and get past that. So he calls it the doctrine of descent. And, we're talking about these types of things every day on this page in some way or some fashion. And if you're interested, because you're new to this page, or maybe this is the first time you're seeing this, every Friday at around, oh, the screen's freezing, at around 9 o'clock, 9:15, right, we go through this workbook, The Quest for Authentic Manhood. And this material helps us address these things in our lives, right? Address these wounds that we have inside, so that we can work them out. And then we're able to move on with our lives. We're able to experience a greater satisfaction of life in all these different areas, because we've cleared out all the junk that was blocking us inside. And we're able to deal with that, right? We're able to internalize that, so then we can then externalize that and take control of our own story, rather than our story controlling us. So if that interests you at all, I invite you to join me and the other guys that are going through this every Friday. It's great stuff. It's really going to make a huge difference in your life. So I'll end tonight's video with that. These 6 things that that I thought were worthwhile from this conference, and then I'm going to think about as I move forward in my life. And I just wanted to share these things with you guys, because it's something from my life that's made a difference in this past week. If you need to talk about anything, you need to get something off your chest, I'm just an instant message or a DM away. You're more than welcome to reach out to me. I'd love to talk with you, to listen, and just be a good brother, just be there for you. So I love you guys, and we'll see you tomorrow night for Tuesday Thoughts. Have a good evening.